It was close to 2 in the morning when the city had almost completely fallen asleep. The streets were quiet traffic. Noise had faded and most people were deep in their beds, unaware that a single moment was about to change everything. Suddenly a sharp scream cut through the silence. It was not the scream of an adult, not an argument, not a normal sound of the night. It was the scream of a young child, raw, terrified, and desperate. Some neighbors heard it and turned in their beds. Others paused for a moment and then convinced themselves it was probably nothing, maybe a bad dream or a child throwing a tantrum. But one man living on that street felt something was wrong. The scream didn't sound normal. It didn't sound safe. And instead of ignoring it, he picked up his phone and called 911. He didn't have details. He didn't know exactly what was happening. All he could say was that he heard a child screaming and that the fear in that scream didn't sound fake. The dispatcher took the call seriously and immediately alerted nearby patrol units. Within seconds, the information was transmitted over the police radio. A young police officer working the night shift heard the call and felt his stomach tighten. Calls involving children were always different, always urgent, always dangerous, and he knew that even a few seconds could mean the difference between life and death. He turned his patrol car toward the address without hesitation. Lights off to avoid drawing attention. As he approached the neighborhood, he noticed something odd. One house was completely dark, while the surrounding homes had porch lights on, and the curtains inside that dark house appeared to move slightly, as if someone was pacing back and forth. The officer parked his vehicle quietly and stepped out. The air felt heavy. He walked toward the front door and listened carefully. At first there was silence, then he heard soft crying, followed by another short scream, closer this time, coming from inside the house. The officer immediately radioed for backup but did not wait. Policy allowed forced entry when a child's life was believed to be in immediate danger, and this was one of those moments. He knocked loudly and announced himself as police. There was no response. The crying continued. His instincts told him time was running out. He forced the door open and stepped inside. What he saw froze him for a split second. A small girl was sitting on the floor near the living room, her knees pulled to her chest, her face pale, her hands shaking uncontrollably. And just a few feet away stood a man holding a knife, his body tense, his eyes wide, and his breathing heavy. The officer instantly placed himself between the man and the child, his voice calm but firm. Ordering the suspect to drop the weapon, the situation was incredibly fragile. One wrong move could cost the child her life. The officer kept talking, slowly, clearly, trying to distract the suspect, asking him questions, keeping his attention locked, while carefully positioning himself to block any sudden movement toward the child. The suspect appeared unstable, his grip on the knife tightening and loosening as if he was debating his next move. The officer's training took over. He maintained eye contact, controlled his breathing, and continued to de-escalate the situation second by second. Outside backup units were arriving, silently moving into position around the house. One officer covered the back door, another prepared to enter through a side window if needed. Inside, the suspect finally hesitated for just a moment. That moment was all the police needed. Backup rushed in, the suspect was taken to the ground, the knife kicked away, and handcuffs secured tightly around his wrists. The threat was over. The child was safe. The officer immediately wrapped his jacket around the girl and carried her outside. She clung to him, crying uncontrollably. But now those tears were mixed with relief, rather than pure fear. Paramedics arrived within minutes to examine her, and investigators began searching the house. What they discovered made the case even darker. The man was not related to the child. He had been under investigation for attempted child abduction in another state, and he had been hiding in the area for weeks, waiting for an opportunity. The girl had been taken hours earlier, and if that scream had not been heard, if that neighbor had ignored it, if the officer had hesitated even briefly, the outcome would have been tragic later that morning. The story spread quietly through police channels, not as a headline, not as a viral news clip, but as another example of why every call matters. The officer was praised by his department. Supervisors reviewed the body camera footage and confirmed that every decision he made was by the book, yet driven by instinct and humanity. When reporters later asked him how he felt about saving the child, he simply said that he did his job, but the truth was that his awareness, courage, and refusal to ignore a single scream had saved a life. And while most people slept through that night unaware of what almost happened, one child woke up alive. Because someone listened, someone cared, and the USA police responded exactly when it mattered most. The sun had barely begun to rise when the house was sealed off with police tape, its quiet suburban appearance now hiding the weight of what had nearly happened inside. Investigators moved carefully from room to room, documenting every detail, while the child was taken to a nearby hospital for evaluation, wrapped in a blanket, and still holding on to the officer's hand until a nurse gently guided her away. Meanwhile, detectives began piecing together the suspect's past, and what they uncovered revealed a far more disturbing story than anyone initially imagined. The man had been drifting between states, using false names, staying in short-term rentals, and targeting neighborhoods that appeared safe and quiet, places where screams were more likely to be ignored than questioned. He had studied police response times, memorized patrol schedules, and deliberately chose nighttime hours when people were least alert. The girl had been taken from a playground earlier that evening while her caregiver was briefly distracted, and witnesses later admitted they saw the man, but assumed he was a relative, a mistake that nearly proved fatal back at the station. The arresting officer was asked to give a full statement, and as he replayed the moments in his head, he realized how close the situation had come to disaster. The suspect had been seconds away from moving the child to another location, a place that likely would have made rescue impossible. Body camera footage showed the child's scream echoing faintly just before the door was breached, a chilling reminder of how timing had changed everything. Detectives also discovered handwritten notes inside the house, detailing routes, times, and observations about local families, including several involving children and single mothers. It became clear that this was not an impulsive crime but a carefully planned pattern, one that had gone unnoticed for too long. The child's interview was handled delicately by specialists trained to speak with trauma victims and through quiet words and long pauses. She explained how the man had threatened her to stay silent, how she had waited until she heard someone outside before screaming with all her strength. A moment of bravery that stunned even seasoned officers. Her scream was not just fear, it was instinct, the instinct to survive. And that instinct echoed through every part of the case. As news of the arrest spread internally, officers from neighboring jurisdictions began contacting the department, realizing the suspect matched descriptions from unsolved cases involving attempted abductions and suspicious encounters. Slowly, a larger picture emerged. This single rescue was likely the key to stopping a series of crimes that could have escalated far beyond what anyone imagined. Prosecutors moved quickly, knowing the strength of the evidence and the urgency of keeping the suspect behind bars, while forensic teams analyzed fingerprints, DNA, and digital devices seized from the house, uncovering encrypted files, location data, and disturbing searches that further confirmed his intentions. The arresting officer, though praised publicly, struggled privately with the emotional aftermath. Images of the terrified child replayed in his mind, and he admitted later that night, calls involving children never truly leave you. They stay with you long after the shift ends. The department arranged counseling, emphasizing that strength also meant knowing when to ask for help, something often overlooked in law enforcement days later. The child was reunited with her family. The moment was quiet, no cameras, no speeches, just tears, relief, and a long embrace that said more than words ever could. Her family thanked the officers repeatedly, but the officer reminded them that it was the child. As courage that made the rescue possible, had she stayed silent, had she given in to fear, the outcome might have been very different. The case eventually went to court, where prosecutors laid out the timeline minute by minute, emphasizing the importance of the 911 call, the rapid response, and the officer's decision to enter without delay. Experts testified that any hesitation would have allowed the suspect to flee. Jurors listened in silence as audio from the body camera played, the faint cry in the background sending chills through the room. When the verdict came back guilty on all major charges, there was no celebration, only a collective sense of closure. Yet even as the courtroom emptied, the impact of that night continued to ripple outward. Police departments used the case as a training example, emphasizing listening to instincts, taking child-related calls seriously, and never dismissing a scream as nothing. Community meetings were held where residents were encouraged to report suspicious behavior, to trust their gut, and to remember that safety often depends on one person choosing not to ignore something that feels wrong. The officer returned to patrol weeks later, back on night shift, back on quiet streets, but he listened differently now. Every sound carried weight, every call mattered more, and somewhere in that same city, a child slept safely in her own bed, unaware that her scream had not only saved her life, but may have prevented countless others from being harmed. And while the story never became national news, never trended online, it lived on in police briefings, court records, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the most important rescues happen when almost no one is watching, when a single voice breaks the silence and someone chooses to respond. In the end, when everything was finally over and the noise of sirens, radios, and courtroom arguments had faded, what remained was something far quieter but far more powerful. A simple truth that stayed with everyone involved. The suspect would spend the rest of his life behind bars, his plans exposed, his freedom permanently taken away. Not because of advanced technology or luck, but because a child found the courage to scream and someone chose to listen. The little girl returned home, her room unchanged, her toys still where she left them, but her life forever altered, and slowly, day by day, she began to heal, not forgetting what happened, but learning that fear did not win that night. The officer returned to patrol, driving the same streets, answering the same calls, but with a deeper awareness that every sound carried meaning, that every report deserved attention, that sometimes doing the right thing means acting before certainty arrives. The neighbor who made the 911 call never met the child, never stood in a courtroom, and never received recognition. Yet his decision became the first link in a chain that saved a life. And perhaps many others. The case never became a headline, never trended online, and was soon replaced by newer stories in the news cycle. But inside police training rooms and quiet family homes, its lesson endured, that danger often announces itself softly, that courage can come from the smallest voices, and that one moment of awareness can stop unimaginable harm. Because on that silent night, a scream broke through the darkness. The police responded without hesitation, and a life was given back before it was taken. And that is where this story truly ends. Not with applause or celebration, but with a child sleeping safely. A city unaware of how close it came to tragedy. And the reminder that sometimes the difference between loss and survival is simply choosing to listen. In the end, when everything was finally over and the noise of sirens, radios, and courtroom arguments had faded, what remained was something far quieter but far more powerful. A simple truth that stayed with everyone involved. The suspect would spend the rest of his life behind bars, his plans exposed, his freedom permanently taken away. Not because of advanced technology or luck, but because a child found the courage to scream and someone chose to listen. The little girl returned home, her room unchanged, her toys still where she left them, but her life forever altered, and slowly, day by day, she began to heal, not forgetting what happened, but learning that fear did not win that night. The officer returned to patrol, driving the same streets, answering the same calls, but with a deeper awareness that every sound carried meaning, that every report deserved attention, that sometimes doing the right thing means acting before certainty arrives. The neighbor who made the 911 call never met the child, never stood in a courtroom, and never received recognition. Yet his decision became the first link in a chain that saved a life. And perhaps many others. The case never became a headline, never trended online, and was soon replaced by newer stories in the news cycle. But inside police training rooms and quiet family homes, its lesson endured, that danger often announces itself softly, that courage can come from the smallest voices, and that one moment of awareness can stop unimaginable harm. Because on that silent night, a scream broke through the darkness. The police responded without hesitation, and a life was given back before it was taken. And that is where this story truly ends. Not with applause or celebration, but with a child sleeping safely. A city unaware of how close it came to tragedy. And the reminder that sometimes the difference between loss and survival is simply choosing to listen. It was close to 2 in the morning when the city had almost completely fallen asleep. The streets were quiet traffic. Noise had faded and most people were deep in their beds, unaware that a single moment was about to change everything.